Pushkin.
So I was thinking about this is actually a really exciting time to talk to you because I'm super interested about your approach to your podcast. And it's especially interesting for me because this is actually something I can relate to. And, I feel like when I talk to musicians, I find what they do absolutely extraordinary because I cannot do any of it. But this, I can sort of sort of understand how you might be feeling around these things. So I'm really curious about your approach to interviewing because you've been interviewed for over 30 years now. So when you decided to take on this project, how did you approach it?
Well, I think the simplest version is I just try to have the same type of conversation I would have with somebody behind the scenes. And of course, you're aware there's a camera, and of course, you're aware of the concept of time. But I've seen in some comments, I don't really read comments, but people will send me things and you get a sense of what's happening. The people who do like the format that the show is in appreciate that it has a deeper dive sort of feel, which I would point to. That's the kind of conversation I would have with a Diane Warren if we were just sitting privately somewhere. I would be asking the same types of questions with the same type of kind of back and forth thing. For people who don't understand it, they seem to be confused that I'm just after what would be called a normal interview format, where someone as erudite as you asks me a question, I just bloviate on for 4 minutes. And some people take the back and forth patois of the thing as disrespect. It's the complete opposite. I really feel that there's so much that gets lost in the translation of conversation because I've been interviewed for 35 years now, that I'm really after something that's almost indefinable. And that's not to say I'm better at it than anybody else. In fact, I'm not very skilled at it at all. But I have an intuitive sense of the way an artist's mind works.
Yes.
Even if it's not mine. And that's borne out over, I think, 25 interviews. There's a commonality in the sense of an inner and an outer experience. Most interviews, and it's no disrespect to you or anybody else, they focus on the outer experience because that's the thing that's readily apparent. It's sort of in evidence. The inner life of an artist is oft less explored, but is the thing that I find utterly fascinating. For example, on this interview that I just did with Diane Warren, and for people who don't know, one of the greatest songwriters ever,
Yep.
9 number-1 hit songs, 33 top 10 songs, and the list of people who've recorded her songs, is a who's who of the greatest vocalists of all time. It's really a stunning set of accomplishments. And yet, if you look at the interview record, there's not a lot about this woman's interior life.
Yes. And her interior life is what's fueling her songwriting.
It's everything. Because she would tell you as a personality in the world that there's nothing particularly remarkable about her. I think utterly remarkable. But she even sort of downplays who she is. But yet the evidence, which is in plain sight, 1,500 songs and counting. And by the way, no sign of letting up. She is pedal to the metal as an artist in residence.
Yeah.
I'm like, give me even just a kernel of what goes on in there that allows this diamond mind of your spirit to continually produce works that are not only at the top of their particular field, but speak universally.
Yes.
In a way that I've rarely approached as an artist. That's fascinating. I could do 19 hours on that. It would bore the hell out of the audience, and it would probably bore the hell out of Diane.
Yeah.
For me, this is everything.
Do you think as an interviewer, I've heard Terry Gross talk about this, that in every interview she does, she's motivated by learning something new about herself. Do you find that through these conversations, you're trying to learn about yourself, or are you truly trying to learn about that specific person, the person in front of you's inner life and their creative process?
One of my great weaknesses is I like to be right. It's probably my greatest weakness. So much of the interview is me trying to confirm of whether my internal assumptions about a set of things is accurate.
Mm.
But there's a charm there because I'm okay with being wrong. Because
Yes.
in this case, I have the subject right in front of me to tell me, no, you're wrong. You got that totally wrong. It's like, okay, great. Because I really do want to know. That is the supreme effort, is knowledge. If anybody knows Enneagrams, I'm a 5, and 5s are all about collecting information. That's how we feel safe in the world. So the more I can kind of confirm my worldview, and in this case with, people of world-class talent and ability or a life story, in a weird kind of way, it confirms that my read on the world is actually fairly accurate. And as an artist type, I've been told my whole life that my perspective on the world is either wrong, overly dramatic, overwrought, just calm down and just kind of get in line type of stuff. But I think has been borne out over the last 20 or 30 years with social media, that people's interior lives are actually a lot more complex than we would have previously thought in prior societies. I mean, there was always indication of it. And of course, what people would read, whether it would be Hemingway or Dickens or, you know, uh, Jane Austen or something, there's obviously rich interior lives, but now it lives on continual display.
Yeah.
And so maybe we're entering an age now, and maybe it's the age of Aquarius or something, but we're entering an age now where maybe there's going to be more introspection on people's actual internal lives or interior lives and how they actually play into their behavior.
That would be nice.
I would hope, because
I'm skeptical, but that would be nice.
Well, God bless, but I would like to make the simple argument that the more people's interior lives are readily available to them, the less violent a planet we would live on.
Yeah. Have you had the experience yet of someone who cannot be drawn out? Someone who doesn't know how to explain their inner life? Someone who, I know a lot of artists express their inner lives through their art. Have you had, and you're very eloquent about your creative process. Have you sat across from someone who just does not know how to explain it?
Yeah. And I think that's totally fine, because at the end of the day, their perspective trumps mine. I'm really in service to tell their story. And that's where people misunderstand what I'm after. I asked a friend of mine who knows me pretty well, do you think I'm talking too much, or you think I'm talking too much about myself? And they said, no. That's how you are in life. And what you do is you create kind of commonality. And what you're doing is you're sharing, because you're trying to say, I think I understand. Is what I'm sharing relate to what you're saying? That made me feel better about it, because at times it does feel to me like I'm talking too much, but I'm really after this interior life. Like I said, I find it utterly fascinating. And let's use Diane Warren as an example. Diane says in the interview, like, I don't really think about a lot of the stuff that you're asking me.
Yeah.
But there were about 2 or 3 instances in the interview, which is about an hour long, where she initially kind of gives me an answer, which says, I don't really think about that, or that's not really, I say something, and then she goes, oh, and then she'll give me something that wasn't previously there. To me, that's the agape moment of like, okay, that's exactly what I'm after.
Yeah.
I'm not asking somebody who doesn't really know me. In the case of Diane, we had met before, but I'm not asking someone to walk into a studio and throw open the door to everything. I think that's really fair. But if they're willing to just crack that door open a little bit here and there, I think I know I gain such immense respect for artists that I already admire.
Yes.
Because the ability to look and see that beautiful engine. And I know not everybody believes in God, but as somebody who does believe in God, I'm oftentimes taken with the magisterial aspect of the human soul and how different every soul on this planet is. And I would include that even into our pets, which is even feels like a unfair word. In our house, we have 3 cats and a dog and 2 fish. And if you spend any time with animals in your home, of course, you see that they have very different personalities.
Oh, yeah.
And they're hardwired in really unique ways. People come to our house and they'll say, all your cats are like dogs. It's like, so where does that come from? Anyway, I think you understand the point I'm making.
Totally. Yeah, I was curious. So Since in your past with press, you sort of like fucked with media. In the beginning of the Pumpkins, I've heard you say that it was sort of a performance art project. And a lot of times the band would make things up in interviews. I'm curious where you stand about sort of like digging and creating viral moments to help your show blow up. You know, it's like a very easy thing. It's a cheap thing that you could probably do like that. What's your take on that?
I can think of about 2 or 3 instances where I went down a particular road with an interview subject on my show. And it was like, I played baseball as a kid. It was like they threw me a spinning curveball and all I had to do was hit it.
Yeah.
And it was instant clickbait.
Can you tell
It,
us who?
I can't remember, honestly.
Uh-huh.
It's an internal feeling of like, oops, there it is. And all I got to do is ask the follow-up question or hit this spinning ball in front of my face and there's a viral moment.
Totally.
And it's like, in all 3 instances, I was like, nope, I don't want to be on that type of show.
Yeah.
And I don't want to do that to my guests. I'm a firm believer, and of course the numbers are still out on this, but I'm a firm believer that we are capable of creating a new type of dialogue in American culture. I know it won't be for everybody because we're dealing with a mass of people who are dopamine addicted. But I do believe there's a different type of conversation that can be had. Obviously, it's the 21st century version of it. But I remember being entranced by conversations when I was a kid on PBS, where they would just go on for hours about really wonky stuff. But if you allow yourself to be drawn in, it's this fecund atmosphere of like, wow, not everything is yes or no, black or white, win, lose. And I think we live in such a bifurcated society right now where that tends to be the common metric.
Yes.
So-and-so won, so-and-so lost. A moment that really stands out starkly in my mind in American life was I watched one of the presidential debates in the last 20 years. And they went to the round table. I don't remember what network, but they went to the round table afterwards. And they were talking about one of the candidates' debate performances. And in the course of the analysis, the person said, I knew they were lying to me, but they did such a good job of lying. I'd have to say they did a great job tonight. And I thought, there's a lightning bolt. I was like, that's it. We live in a society now where you're no longer punished for openly lying. You're rewarded for the artifice of your capability to lie. And in a post-truth world, and we've got tremendous artists who've created these avatars that are world-class avatars. I don't need to name the names. Mostly they tend to reside in pop stars.
Yeah.
But they've created these world-class avatars that sell perfume and shoes and dresses and albums and stadiums full of people. But I also talk to a lot of young kids who are really kind of almost stung by it all. It's not even that they dislike the artist, but they're almost saying to me, like, to quote the Peggy Lee, is that all there is? Like, is me as I am disqualify me from the thing that I might want to become? And I went through a very similar thing, and that goes back to us messing with the media. I felt very early on, circa 1989, 90, that who I was not going to work.
Yeah.
That personality was being rejected. So I created an avatar of myself, not to become more attractive, actually to become more repulsive. I turned that avatar into a weapon. And what's really sort of interesting is at 57 years old, people are still convinced I'm the avatar, not the person.
Yeah.
The person is, I'm not saying I'm not a prickly pear, but I'm a well-rounded human being, whether it's family or charity work and a tea house and a wrestling company. There's other sides to me besides this raconteur. No pun intended. But people are really in love with the avatar because it sells stuff, even if it's negative clicks.
Yeah. Does the avatar have anything to do with wrestling? I always saw that as you sort of adopting that same wrestling entertainment ethos where it's just totally over the top. It's shock value. Does it come from that at all?
It came later from that. From the late 80s up until the late 90s, I didn't consciously know that that's what I was doing.
Got it.
And I was at a wrestling show one night, and I talked to a young man before the show who was getting an opportunity, and he was very nervous. And I watched him go out, and sort of in a moment of fealty, I wanted to watch and see how he did. And the crowd was mercilessly mean to him, booed and yelled and threw stuff. And so when he came back to the curtain, my Piscean empathy was like, oh, I felt bad for him. And he
Yeah.
walked through the curtain. I said, how do you feel? He said, I feel great. And I said, I don't understand. He said, I did my job. They hated me. And it was like this light bulb went off in my head. I said, oh, that's what I do. I'm actually by engendering a response. Because I used to say the opposite of love is not hate, it's apathy.
But as someone who feels a lot, doesn't the hate denigrate you? And I mean, that's got to hurt your soul.
Totally toxic.
Yeah.
Totally a pyrrhic approach. It's not, I do not recommend it for the faint of heart. But I made my point. The problem is I've raised my hand in different decades and say, okay, I'm done making my point. I just want to go back to being Bill from Glendale Heights. And they're like, no, 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 no. You're in it now. You are this. And so at some point you become your avatar.
Yes.
What you want to be or not. And I always start every sentence involving that with, I created it, it's my responsibility. I know why I created it. I can blame the media or I can blame the teacher in fourth grade, but I did it. So I'm okay with that part of it. But it does get toxic when you literally see, and we, of course, we live in a hyper politicized society. You literally see where people cannot get out of the, like, no fact will change their opinion. There's no, you become kind of part of something that's almost inexplicable. It's like they need someone to boo.
Yeah.
And once you're kind of in the heel section of the booing, they don't want you to come out of it because you're a really good heel. They need somebody to be angry at or hate on, or like I told Joe Rogan in this interview that we just did, about how at some point I felt like I was being made to pay for the sins of the generational figures that had left the planet.
Yeah.
And he was like, I don't really understand that. And I was like, I'm expected to carry a flag for people who aren't even here for this amorphous concept of Gen X.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, I didn't even agree with all those values either.
Yeah.
And I said it at the time, irrelevant. It's like a judge out of a Pink Floyd movie, irrelevant. You were there. You were on MTV. You carry this flag whether you want to or not. And that's...
You're like, they didn't even accept me.
Oh, no.
Now I'm the spokesperson.
No, I mean, the classic example I always give is the Pumpkins albums got horrible reviews in the decade. Now they're all considered classics.
Yeah.
But at the time, Melancholy, I got 2.5 stars in Rolling Stone.
Wow. What was the reason? What was the argument?
I said it was a piece of shit. An overambitious piece of shit.
Overambitious.
Yeah, that was a bad thing to be back then.
Yes. So speaking of Gen X, I thought it was so interesting, and I saw you sort of have an aha moment during your Tom Morello interview where he was explaining his theory why there was sort of a rejection of fame during the 90s. And I saw it sort of click for you, and I thought it was really interesting, and I wanted to hear more from you about it. But basically, he was saying a lot of the artists who ended up getting big in the 90s sort of like came up worshiping two different camps of music. A lot of them were like super into hardcore punk rock. They were into like Bad Brains, Fugazi, Minor Threat, but they were also into Sabbath and Judas Priest. And there's sort of like a conflict in values. Is that something that you, and so when some of those artists like Rage, like Nirvana, like Pearl Jam started to get super big, they felt really guilty and horrible about it.
Yes, and I think Tom's point was then they projected that discomfort out into the world and that problems. In my case, I wasn't uncomfortable with it. I was uncomfortable with the projection from the alternative community, particularly from snobs like Kim Gordon, that I was supposed to behave a certain way because in the rules of alternative music, you had to have a punk rock ethos, therefore, or you did not belong. I mean, there is a quote in Kim Gordon's book where she literally says, I wasn't punk rock. Like, what the fuck does that mean? And by the way, Kim Gordon's father was a professor in a university. That is an upper middle class position. You know what I mean? Kids who come from actual sewers don't care about ethos. They care about survival. So I had no problem with being successful. I had a problem with people like that projecting on me their ethos of like, it's okay to be ambitious as long as you wear the right t-shirt, which is all just complete bullshit, malarkey, to quote Biden. It's a malarkey, total bullshit. Again, there's that concept of ambition. I was too ambitious. Ambitious for what? My future was working at a record store or being on MTV. You choose. Being on MTV looked a lot more attractive to me because it meant I could do what I want to do and I could go where I want to go. I didn't have a professor father. My father was in a house in Chicago dealing drugs and guns. So for me, it was survival. It was like the choices were stark and simple. So I agreed with Tom that that was definitely at the heart of a lot of those things. But again, I think those were, in many cases, put upon ethics that I did not care for.
Yeah. So when did you start talking about your early childhood? When did that come into your story? When did you start making that public? Because that does sort of change the way that maybe people perceive you.
Well, 93, when the Siamese Dream album came out, because people wanted to understand the subtextual language. And then there was this kind of rise of latchkey kids who suddenly were interested in what I was saying. And part of that lyrical change had a lot to do with Courtney, because Courtney chided me for my hippie LSD-inspired lyrics on our first album. And she said something, and I'm paraphrasing, which went like, why can't the person I talk to on the phone write the lyrics for the next record or something? So I was like, okay, I'll take that on as a challenge. But when I opened the door, I found a lot of pain and a lot of denial and a lot of stuff in there. And the book, The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron, really helped me to claim this voice in there that was sort of screaming to get out, but I was terrified because I knew I would be attacked. And ... I was, including people accusing me of making up my childhood. I would routinely be asked in interviews to qualify my abuse, which is insane. Like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much were you beaten? You know, it's like, what is it? Yeah. Oh, no, I'm not. I'm not even close to dramatizing it. I was asked at least 40 or 50 times in the 90s to qualify my abuse.
Wow.
And I found a line eventually which kind of worked, which was like, am I in the abuse Olympics? Like, do I have to like qualify to have agency to talk about being abused? Meanwhile, behind the scenes, I was being poked on by my family for talking about the family secrets.
Oh, yeah.
So I was getting it from both ways. On one hand, I wasn't authentic enough. And the other side, the family side, they were mad for me talking about what had happened because you don't talk about that stuff in public.
Yeah. From an artist's perspective, the way that you started writing lyrics, where I imagine when you start out, it's common to take on a character. And then you hear someone like Courtney say, look, like, I want you to write from your heart. I want you to write from you. That seems like a really, really big jump. How long did that actually take? And like, how long was that process? How many albums did that last?
Well, it strangely coincided with the need for us to make a successful record. I'm the type of person where I couldn't stand being successful if I wasn't authentic, which sounds strange because we're talking about avatars. But most fans of my work know that the voice in the music is very authentic. All the character stuff all around it is a bunch of smoke. But the voice singing is pretty on point. So yeah, it was like, okay, you've got to make a really successful record. You've got to live up to the success of these new grunge bands, which have sort of exploded on the world scene. It's your major label debut. Oh, by the way, you have to write pop songs which go on the radio. Somehow put all those pieces together and get back to me later. The only thing I found that resonated deeply with me that I was willing to kind of die for was to speak with an authentic voice. And it went on for about 8 months where I just, I'm painting an analogy, but you put pen to paper and you're just too afraid to write what you want to say. That went on for 8 months. Almost killed myself repeatedly. Ended up living in a parking garage. I mean, it was a very haunting time. It sounds kind of strangely dramatic in hindsight, but at the time it was very harrowing. And I was sober most of it too. I was not. Yeah, I mean, I was dealing with it full frontal.
Yeah.
And I reached a point where I'd made up my mind that I couldn't deal with the pressure anymore. I was going to kill myself. So I started giving everything away. I started doing all the things you're not supposed to do. I started planning my own suicide. I started envisioning what people would look like standing around my casket. I went through the whole mental ideation. And I got to the point where I made up my mind, okay, I'm going to kill myself on Friday. And I set the date and I counted the days down, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I got up the day where I was going to kill myself. And I was like, I really don't want to kill myself, but I kind of made up my mind to do this. And something broke in me. And I'm not making this part up. I literally was like, well, if you're not going to kill yourself, then you need to be honest. And within the next 24 to 48 hours, I wrote 2 of the most famous songs that we ever had, which was Today and Disarm.
Wow.
And out came tumbling this unafraid voice. It was pretty shocking. And I still can't even explain it to this day. It was like the door finally broke and I was like, okay, I'm just going to be me.
What do you attribute that to?
I think it's like if you face your greatest fear, you become kind of unafraid.
Yeah.
I'm not being artful in how I'm explaining it, but it's like you kind of faced it down.
Yeah.
You faced the final boss at the level or something, And what I would say, and I'm not a person to ask for public empathy, but I will say for the point of illustration, if anybody knows anything about me, that has been a calamitous decision. Being myself in public has not been a joyride.
Yeah.
It's been a very complicated, oftentimes confusing to me way to go through business. But as an artist, I'm fine to stand by it because the work is there. What it's done to my life, what it's done to my personal relationships, what it's done to the band, that's all for books and wonderful podcasts like yours. But I stand by the artistic version of it because I don't know any other way. That's all I know. And that's without training. Again, not asking for anything, just illustrate the point. I didn't go to college. I had no artistic training. I had no mentor. I had nobody to sit me down and say, this is how you write a song. This is how you play guitar. I had none of that. Everything is completely self-taught. And if I'm a suicidal personality in terms of how I attack the public sphere, well, I think you can understand where the root of that comes from because that's the way I did it and that's the way I broke through. So why wouldn't I keep doing it? Because I don't know any other way.
Yeah. Have you had any other moments in your life that were that rock bottom?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Early 2000s, there were some periods that were really, really rough.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I that's why I've been willing to talk publicly about, I guess you would call it suicide prevention.
Yeah.
Many private conversations with people who are going through it, because I understand that once you're in it, it's like it's like one of those Star Trek things where they lock on the ship and the ship gets pulled in and there's nothing you can do,
Yes.
That's how it felt to me. Like I just couldn't escape the gravity, but I did, and I did multiple times. And I don't wear it like a badge of pride. I'm almost kind of ashamed that I had to get to that point, but I can also talk proudly that I was able to do something with it. Alchemically, like lead into gold stuff.
So around the year 2000, that would be the Machina album, which just turned 25 in February, so about a month ago. So is that a period? I know that was a really hard period for the band. How do you think about that period now that you have some distance?
Well, when Jimmy Chamberlain left the Pumpkins in 96 and my mother died, I made the decision to record the Adore album, which was basically career suicide. And I was told at the time it was career suicide, and I persisted, and it basically was career suicide. Now it's considered a really, really a warmly thought of record. Machina was the response to the negativity around Adore. It was like, we have one more record on our album contract. We signed it together. Let's reform as four, and let's just kind of do a record, give our best college effort like the Beatles did, make one more record, and go out on a fiery ball of glory. And it didn't work out that way. We didn't make it through the entire period without our bassist Darcy leaving, and then there were a multitude of problems in making the record and in also promoting the record, including the record company completely abandoning us. But the funny part was, towards the end of it, I announced that the band was going to break up, which was always part of the plan. We threw on the internet in a moment of, I guess, I was just kind of pissed off at the record company. I threw out another record, which is commonly known as Machina 2.
Yeah, for free.
Friends and Enemies of Modern Music. And the fans loved that record. I went back to the record company and I said, I know this sounds crazy and I know we're leaving, but fans really like this record. Why don't we put the two records together as an intact unit and put it back on the market? And I think you'll get your money back and we'll be in a good place. And they told me to fuck off. Huh. But they asked for CD copies that they could hand out. So they still helped market Machina 2 behind the scenes, but they wanted nothing to do with it publicly or commercially. So when I made the reissue deal with what was then EMI Records, now our catalog is absorbed into Universal. But at the time I made a deal, I said, because they wanted all the albums reissued with box sets. I said, I only make this deal if I'm allowed to put Machina 1 and Machina 2 together and into an intact unit. So we're prepping that now.
Oh, nice.
And so Machina 1 and Machina 2 will be reunited as they were written into one crazy, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 songs.
Wow.
So it's like a Wagner.
It's
like a Wagner song cycle or something. It's like the Ring cycle. It goes on forever, but it really is the story of a band disintegrating, and by extension, my personality disintegrating into some sort of spiritual being who trundles on post 2000. So it's hard to talk about that period, but contextually, I think to your question, I look back on it more fondly now than I did at the time.
Have you thought about selling the catalog?
I've been approached many times and I've said no every time.
Do you think it'll ever come to a point where you will?
I don't know. My lawyer, whose name I will leave out of this for his own sense of sanity, but he's one of the top catalog guys in the world.
Wow.
So I'm lucky in that my guy knows the business. So when we first sat together with the idea that we were going to work together, and he's a huge fan from way back. He talks about buying Siamese Dream the day it came out. So he's a convert. He believes in what I do. So the first time that we really sat down to have a conversation about, okay, we're going to work together, what does this really mean? The first question out of his mouth was, do you want to sell your catalog? And he was asking more strategically than to encourage me to do that. And I said, no. And he said, why? And I said, because it's undervalued. That I completely agree. So until the catalog is at its true value, it's not even worth entertaining. It would be very, very, very hard for me to sell my catalog, though.
Yeah.
I hear all the arguments and there's fiscal arguments and there's still your songs, but for me, this has been my ticket to sanity.
Yeah.
So I have an incredibly close emotional attachment. And as I like to say, for the 30 that people like to listen to, and I'm blessed to even have that many, there's still another 370 sitting there that don't really get listened to much. So I'm more on the Irving Berlin, Diane Warren tip, which is you're going to hear all my songs eventually, and I'm going to do what I got to do. So handing them over to somebody and figuring that they're going to take care of my other children in this euphemistic case is hard for me to believe.
Yeah, it's interesting how now it's totally acceptable. People don't bat an eye when they hear, so-and-so institutional artist sold their catalog. It's just sort of, okay.
Yeah, I don't ascribe anything to those things because everybody should make decisions based on what's best for them and their family. But it's
Yeah.
hard sometimes when you see people you truly respect and have always been held up as paragons of virtue or independence
Yes.
kind of quote unquote sell out to the man. And there may come a day where I too will sell out to the man. But let me add one other thing. And I have thrown this out there, and people always look at me with this really puzzled look. And then they realize that I'm serious. Both my children have some musical ability, but I would never push them into music if they didn't want to. There's no this isn't the Brady Bunch or something, right? But I do not rule out that the brand of the Smashing Pumpkins will continue, not just past me, but it would continue because it's set up as an artistic institution. I see it as being completely possible that my children would take over the Smashing Pumpkins at one point, but play their own songs and not even necessarily play mine. It's like being in the Flying Walendas or something.
Yeah.
It's not a Hank Williams Jr. situation where he had to play his father's songs.
Right.
I could see a scenario where my children would take over the brand, but not even feel the need to play my music.
Are you careful that you're not putting pressure on them?
Oh yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
My son totally on his own has asked for a guitar,
Wow.
a ukulele, and a bass. And he plays the ukulele pretty well for a kid who doesn't practice much. So,
Yeah.
and my daughter has found some program where you sing along to songs and it analyzes your pitch.
Oh, wow.
She's only 6 years old. So the other day, my wife sent me a clip of my daughter in bed singing "Sweet Dreams" by the Eurythmics.
Oh,
So both of them show
little
interest.
Annie Lennox.
Sure, but I would never push them into it
Yeah.
because the one thing my father said that did resonate over time was he didn't want me to go in the music business because in his estimation it was a shit business. So I understand what he meant
Was he
by
wrong?
no, it's a shit business.
Yeah.
No, but I've said publicly, and I'll say it to you, it's a rapacious business. It still is anti-artist, which
Oh,
is
for sure.
unbelievable after 100 years of business. It's still wholly anti-artist, which is why you still see those contentious types of relationships between artists and labels or artists and their handlers.
Yeah.
If you really get behind the scenes and you talk to people who truly run the music business, they'll tell you that and I think it's a bit of a rationalization, but they'll tell you that part of their logic is artists don't last. Most artists are lucky to have 3 or 4 years. So they're oriented around a concept, which is, I don't really have to worry about your future because it's not my future.
Right.
I find that completely shocking. Because if you have a Billie Eilish or, a Bob Marley, I don't know how you don't go, my goodness, this is such a rare flower.
Yeah.
We really got to do everything in our power to nurture and let this artist fly with the biggest wings possible. Because, by the way, we're going to make more money. They go into this other mode, which is like, oh, we better be careful. We're going to lose control.
Yeah. I thought it was really interesting, your conversation with Sharon Osbourne on your podcast, because she has been in the music industry since she started working with her dad officially working with her dad when she was 15. And back then, the music industry was so much more upfront about just being ruthless. There were no protections in place for artists. So that was just interesting to hear that whole lineage. And I was curious, in your interview with Sharon, you seemed like you were giving her a lot more room to talk. Whereas the Tom Morello, you were so excited. You were like, jumping in, and I'm sorry for interrupting you, but you were like so,
Sure.
like excited about it because there's just a lot of commonality, I think. But with the interview with Sharon, is there a reason you had a different approach? Did it have anything to do with your past with Sharon?
A little bit. Sharon and I made up behind the scenes, easily over 15 years ago.
Yeah.
But I think there's a sweetness and an affection there that we have naturally. And I wanted to be careful in getting her to talk about stuff that maybe she wouldn't normally talk about in a way that would make her feel safe. And I
Yeah.
think part of that was also an understanding that if I wasn't careful, it might come off that I still had a bone to pick, given our very public falling out circa around Machina, actually.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I know that Sharon and I are cool, and she knows that I'm cool with her. But at the same time, I could see where maybe people would be misinterpreting my approach. So, if you see any nervousness there, it's not between Sharon and I. It's because I want to make sure that nobody misreads what's going on, because, like I said, this is a long ago healed thing between us.
Yeah. How did you end up Well, how did the avatar eventually break down? And was that in the Machina era?
Uh, I think I rationalized that once I was out of it with the Pumpkins, it was like, okay, that was a contrivance of that. I'm 33 years old. I'm going to be on my own now, and I'm going to get a new record deal. And I'm going to soldier on as quote unquote Billy Corgan, whoever that is. And I genuinely tried in the band that followed the Pumpkins, which was Juan, to just be a member of the band.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you a funny thing that happened. Juan was very much put together as a kind of an equal ensemble. All front members of the band could sing, and two of the male members had sung for their own bands or in their own situations. And Paz, the bass player, could sing well too. So I was trying to find something that had a little bit more balance to it than, say, the Pumpkins, at least on paper. And I kind of got comfortable with not being the front guy, even though I was the front guy.
Yeah.
And I read a review of us back when I read reviews that chastised the show as being boring and chastised me for sort of laying back or something. So in a moment of pique, if that's the way you pronounce that word, I decided the next night that I was going to go out there and put on an old-fashioned show in the way that I knew how to do in the Pumpkins. And so I was jumping all over, and I had a great time, and the show was great, and it was really well received. I had no idea, none, that night there was a critic for Rolling Stone in the audience. As only fate would have it. I had no idea there was a reviewer there. Because usually somebody will come back and tell you so-and-so's in the house
Yeah.
or something. They're on the
Right.
guest. So imagine that I've done this whole tour where I've really kind of laid back. And then on this one night, I decide to be my Machina self or something. And then this review comes out, and the reviewer chastises me for making the show about me. I thought, well, damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Totally.
So in my brain, that equals, well, if I'm damned if I do, I'm going to do it. I'm going to make it worse. So that set into motion a whole nother round of various versions of whatever this is, and
Yeah.
it gets awfully disassociative at times.
Yeah.
But I'm interested, I guess. So that's my excuse.
Yeah.
It's not healthy.
It works though.
It does and it doesn't.
I mean, I don't know how I'm sure personally, emotionally, it's extremely hard. Publicly, entertainment-wise, it works.
Let me take a philosophical leap. A child that's abused or a child that feels neglected, that changes its personality to gain attention or love,
Yeah.
ultimately knows, and Alice Miller talks about this in the great book, The Drama of the Gifted Child, that the child is aware that it's inauthentic. So there's a sorrow attached to the personality, because the personality is the device by which they're removed from the love that they really want, which is self-acceptance or the acceptance of the parent or whatever. So to persist at 57 with this disassociative set of characters, it means on some level, I'm still not getting the love that I would like to get. There's a sadness to that,
Yeah.
And to illustrate this example, again, not asking for any empathy or sympathy. I will be walking through an airport, and that's usually where people can get to me because I'm in the world. Gotta catch a plane. And I can't tell you how many times people have come up and talked to me as if I'm the agent for the person that wrote all the songs.
What do you mean?
They talk to me like I'm not Billy Corgan, the artist. They talk to me like I'm Billy Corgan, the human being. Who can Billy Corgan, the human being, talk to the person they're really interested in? I know it sounds strange, but I'm telling you, this is a common experience.
Like, can you have a meeting with that guy because
Yes.
something's going on with him that obviously isn't right?
Yes. Like, can you talk to your twin?
Because they see you in the world and they see, oh, he's a guy.
But they don't want that guy. They're not interested in that guy. So it's weird because you're constantly in this position of almost being put down,
Yeah.
but they're putting you down with you. I know it sounds very strange and it's hard to translate, but I've had this experience many, many times. It's like,
Yeah.
we call them, in my world, we call them Siamese zombies. They're people who are in love with Siamese Dream, and there's no other record for them in the Pumpkins canon. And that's all they want to talk about. And they'll talk about it for hours. And if you even remotely go off the subject, their eyes glaze over and they get bored. I call them Siamese zombies, right? Because it's literally talking to a zombie.
Yeah.
Okay. They will talk to me and say, you know, it would be really nice if you could talk to the guy who wrote those songs because I would like more of those songs.
Yes.
You know, I'm the guy who wrote those songs. And they're like, yeah, but if you were really the guy who wrote those songs, you would write more of them. And I'm like, no, I'm the guy who wrote the songs and I choose not to write more songs like that. And they're like, no. There's something wrong in this exchange. It's like I'm not even there. I know it's
super bugged out.
This is real. But again, I think it speaks to the disassociative nature of our culture.
Oh, yeah.
Digital avatars, real human beings. Human beings in a digital currency culture are inconvenient because they cry, they bleed, they sigh, they yawn, they look away. It's inconvenient to this digital agape that needs to go on. And the pop stars have become very skilled at nurturing this digital agape to their benefit. So everybody else seems like they're moving slow.
That also seems like it's a product of the nature of your job, which is pouring all of your emotional life into something that becomes a product that people consume.
I'm okay with that. And as crazy as it sounds, I'm okay with that. What I'm not okay with is that's the wrong set of pouring emotions. Can you pour a different set of emotions?
Yeah.
As if there's a choice. That's a weird. Like, it's like saying to your partner, you're loving me wrong.
Yeah.
Can you love me this other way? And they're like, no, I'm loving you the way I love. This is all I know. I'm giving you everything I got. No. I saw this TV show. Can you love me like that?
Yeah.
It really is this embrace of an inauthentic world.
Yes.
And what's even more frightening is that nobody seems to care. And when I say nobody, I'm being hyperbolic, but I mean, you don't hear this big hue and cry in the culture. What happened to our authentic culture? I think because people are entertained, bread and circus. So as long as they're entertained, they're with the inauthenticity. And I think the rising suicide rates with young people are some small indication, and they're through the roof, that something is amiss. But nobody's want to hit the pause button and even do any kind of deep dive study on how this dissociative culture is influencing young people. And again, I go back to the analogy I made. I think they look down the pike and they say, there's no room for me to be me.
Do you really think, with everything that's going on and how fast things escalate in media, that people will get to a point where authenticity will make a comeback? Do you really think that's possible?
I do, but I'm going to paint it in a bleak, cynical way.
Yeah.
I think you will end up with a culture which is 80 to 90% inauthentic, and a bifurcated culture which celebrates the 10 or 15 to 20% remaining. And they will set up their own economy and celebrate their, for lack of a better word, authenticity. Yet you're going to get to the point where you're going to have artists say, they will say on their records, there's no auto-tune on this record. You know, like the performance you hear, we actually recorded.
Yeah.
You know, this photo is not airbrushed. And you see little glimmers of that, like when famous actresses will post pictures with no makeup.
Yes.
There's some
Pam Anderson no makeup tour.
Sure. There's some acknowledgement of it all. But I do think it's going to end up in a bifurcated type of thing.
Yeah.
Crassly, it'll become a business model. It's the thing that
Yeah.
the real people will point at the non-real people and say they're not real.
Yeah.
And the non-real people will say, we're having a lot more fun over here. Enjoy your no makeup and enjoy your no auto-tune.
Totally.
But we're over here having a great party. And oh, by the way, we're on all the major media platforms because it's all about clicks. So as long as we get clicks, we don't care what you think because clicks are the new cash.
Yeah.
So that's the cynic in me. But I do feel, and I'll make one last grand prognostication, which is I do think you're going to see the old media system vis-a-vis how it interlaces with entertainment. Pick your poison. Grammys, Oscars, Emmys, MTV Awards. I'm not just talking about ratings. I think that whole system of elites basically picking and choosing winners or losers is about to explode.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's going to vanish, but I think it's about to explode. I think we've reached the tolerance point for the deception of it all. And I'm not saying that people don't win awards. I've won awards. I'm proud to say I've won a couple Grammys.
Yeah.
But that system is become so burdened by the weight of artifice that it can't longer sustain itself.
What markers will we use though, as if you put yourself in a journalist seat? A lot of the times when we write the intros for this show, we'll say, so-and-so artist, 3-time Grammy Award winner. Like when you were talking about Diane Warren, you listed off her many awards. If those shows, those old institutions blow up and disappear, and they're already, irrelevant, very close to it, and there's no more platinum albums, like, Eminem comes out in 2003 and goes like triple platinum on the first day. That's gone. So what will be the markers of success?
I know it's a hard thing because I think you're asking a great question, but I think you'll ultimately, I guess I'm personalizing it. I think you would survey the landscape and you will see who has influence.
Yeah.
Using myself as an example, right? Under the old system, I was told repeatedly for 15 to 20 years of my life, my influence was gone. My value was severely diminished. What value I had was in the past. And so my only value in the present was to reap the past. I was told this repeatedly by some of the most famous and influential people in the music business. No joke. In boardrooms where they just looked at me and said, here's where you are, take it or leave it. I refused, I fought, I stuck my crazy foot in the ground, and I think now you see that I do have more influence than they would have given me credit for. It's hard to quantify what that influence is.
Yeah.
In the old guard, it would have been, well, so-and-so mentioned you in an interview, or your album, the number 4 most influential alternative record of 1993. No one gives a shit about any of that anymore. So you almost have to do a daily read of who actually can put their thumb on the scale and move something. And I'll bring it back selfishly to the podcast. My voice in the podcast is important, not because it's me, but because I have the authority to stand there and have these conversations. You don't even have to like my music, buy my music, care about me as an artist, care that I'm a father and an entrepreneur. But you cannot deny that I've spent 35 years in the game.
Yeah.
Okay. I know the game really well. And by the way, I'm on the record speaking about the game for 35 years.
Yeah.
So just the ability to stand in that forest and say, I know what I'm talking about. You can disagree with me. In fact, go ahead. But at least I have a right to stand here. That's a different type of authority. It has nothing to do with record sales. It has nothing to do with whether my song is on the chart. That is what I'm after is, this is where the legacy media is so flat-footed because they're so reliant on the New York Times system on down that has existed in our entire lifetimes. The New York Times was like the Pope, and then everything flowed down from the Pope. That shit is gone. And doesn't matter your political stripe or social stripe. You can easily jump on YouTube or Twitter. I still call it Twitter.
Me too.
Okay, God bless. You can pretty much figure out who can put their thumb on a scale and actually move stuff. This is a new economy that's very unprecedented. And you can see the legacy media is completely looking around saying, what happened? They burned out all the ist words. They burned out all the cancel culture. They lost that game. And now there's this whole new rise of people, and everyone's going, who the hell are these people? And why are they getting 300,000 views, 60,000 views,
Yes.
3 million views? Who are these people? In that economy, I'm actually quite valuable.
Mm-hmm.
So that's weird because, again, I'm speaking again personally. I was told for 20 years, you have no value unless you ring the bell of 1979 into eternity. And to be fair, even people in my personal life that know me, that have known me for 20, 30 years, they don't understand it because they're told by their family or their friends or their workmates that their assessment of my value. These are people in my, they don't even get it.
Yeah.
They think I'm crazy because I'm like, no, you don't understand. It's like, who can walk in a room and actually say something that has any meaning in a world that has very little meaning anymore? Because it's all been so gamed.
Yeah.
It's like the whole world's Disneyland now, right? It's not funny at some point. It gets a little, it's like, I used to have his drummer. He went to Disneyland one time, 4 days in a row. And I thought, oh my God, I love Disneyland, but 4 days in a row, I start to lose my mind with It's a Small World. Okay, that's what, to me, it's like, we're all in Disneyland day after day after day. Like, and we can't get out of it. The screaming headlines, the hyper politicization of every facet of our society.
Yes.
It doesn't matter your politics. We're just all sort of tired. So at some point you look around and go, I just want a quiet song and a quiet hymn or a tree to sit under.
Yes.
So, of course, in the digital landscape, we're going to find those voices and those people, which is why anachronistically doing a podcast, which feels more like a PBS special from 1972 than 2025 is gaining really good traction because it feels like just a nice, quiet poem where two people can have a conversation about stuff that is important. And that, you know how I know it's important? Because I know it's important. It's life. It's like, read Sanskrit. It's like it's there all the way back 4,000 years. Life, love, ambition, flew too close to the sun. This shit's never going to get old.
No, you're so right. For me, it seemed like a big turning point was your 2017 appearance on Rogan. I feel like that really showed all of us this like really thoughtful, eloquent, the elder statesman within the business. It showed us a new side of Billy Corgan. That was my experience. I don't know if everyone had that experience, but like I was watching it with my husband the other night and he's like, damn, this guy's like smart. And I'm like, I know, it's crazy. And he's got like these crazy stories. So what was a turning point for you where you were like, I want to do this. I want to get into the whole podcasting thing.
I didn't particularly have any yen for it, right? Yeah, yen, that's a good word. I did a podcast a few years back built around our album Autumn at 33 songs. I did the podcast. Nobody cared. Nobody was ringing me up to do a podcast deal. So I thought, okay, that's just not for me, although I enjoyed it. I was very intrigued with what Rick Beato does.
Yes.
And he's pivoted a couple times and he's even pivoting again. Very smart guy.
Yeah.
Very capable musician and musical mind as well. And both Jimmy and I from the Pumpkins have had the honor of being interviewed by Rick.
Yep.
But I think what Rick showed is there are a lot of musicians out there who just want to hear about music, not through the prism of the drama and tell us a good tour story, Motley Crue one more time.
Yeah.
Like, tell us how you actually recorded that bass sound because people are still talking about that bass sound 40 years later. And I thought, okay, if there's a market there for what Rick's after on the deep dive, kind of let's call it the nerd side of the equation, which I love. There's no distance saying nerd. Then I know there's this other side of the conversation, which more gets into the interior life of a writer.
Right.
And by extension, the interior life of an actor or a scientist. And so that's my ultimate ambition is to broaden the scope past the arts, where you can talk to anybody, whether they're a successful podcaster, a successful race car driver, because I think that interior life discussion is something that's really fresh.
Yeah.
if you can do it in a non-clickbaity way, then I think we all benefit from that. So that's kind of the whole setup. And then the other part of the story is I had no plans in doing it. And then I was on Bill Maher's show, Club Random.
Yeah.
I did the appearance. They pulled me aside and said, we'd like you to be a host on his new podcast network he's doing.
Wow, that's cool. Yeah.
And one thing that struck me right away, and I've known Bill for over 25 years, is Bill, is very much a free speech guy.
Yes.
And I'm not a free speech absolutist, but I'm very much a free speech person. I think our society ultimately benefits from open dialogue, however uncomfortable, that we always come out on the better if we just are willing to have the dialogue. Like, I hear you and I agree, or I disagree, but
Yeah.
we work forward. Anyway, sorry, I'm over explaining. But, and even just as a sidelong illustration of that, I just did the appearance on Rogan and a new one.
Yeah.
And it's done very, very well, in the economy of podcasting. Lots of people have watched it. But within 12 hours of my appearance on there, here come the fans who are mad at me for being on Rogan's podcast.
Yes.
We didn't talk politics at all in 2 hours and 45 minutes. And going back to being, why I wanted to work with Bill and Bill's stance on free speech. There's no politics in my podcast. There's no politics at all. I mean, we talk a little bit about it with Tom Morello, but even then it's more philosophical than pontificating on current events.
Yeah.
I don't want the artistic sphere, and I'm going to extend that to scientists as well. I don't want the artistic sphere that I'm after to be poisoned by people's polemic need to pick winners and losers. I want us all to win. That's why I called it what it is. I really think these are magnificent people that I want to share with the audience from my perspective. Okay. But when you see people trying to go after you because, quote unquote, I love these buzzwords, disinformation and all this stuff. I mean, it's unbelievable to me. First off, Joe's the number one podcast host in the world.
For years.
For many years.
Yeah.
Second of all, Joe's been a public person for 30, going on 35 years. So I'm not supposed to go on somebody's podcast because a percentage, it could be 50%, it could be 100, I don't care. A percentage of the US population has an issue with the man's politic. And somehow by being on his podcast and talking about nothing about politics, I'm somehow endorsing his position. Joe doesn't even know what my political position is. He didn't even ask me. There was no qualification of, do you agree with me or you disagree with me? Let's just come on and talk about whatever we're going to talk about. That to me is not a society I want to be part of. And I would say we've had about 7 to 10 years of that society and it's not working. It's not working. So why people persist is beyond me, but they're going to persist. I acknowledge that. Let them persist, but I think they're going to find it's a losing strategy.
You seem very aware, which I appreciate, of how each podcast is different and the host approaches it differently. So for Rick Beato, you sit down and you're going to get like a really intense technical conversation about choices you've made artistically. And you seem prepared for that and up for it too, which is great. With Bill Maher, what's it like being in his little Club Random? Like, he's like smoking blunts, which is so crazy. And like doing shots. Like, what's it like being right there?
Well, my father was a weed smoker and smoked continuously. So it'd been a while since I had a good contact high. So as Bill's smoking away, I start to get a little bit buzzed.
Yeah.
And then you're thinking like, I'm pretty much a sober person in life. So I'm sitting there thinking, am I about to do something stoned, which I'm not used to being stoned? Am I about to do something that's going to get me, blown up here in public? So there were times where I was kind of like, as long as I was afraid to say something, I was afraid to say it wrong.
Yes.
But like I said, I've known Bill for a long time, and Bill's a very interesting mind in that, like all great professional comedians, you're never quite sure where they're going to go. It's not that they're always after the joke, but they're kind of after the bit.
Yeah.
Take me to the bit. So we started talking about Gilligan and masturbation, and it was interesting. It got pretty interesting, but it reminded me of about 8,000 other stoner conversations I've had. So
Yeah, which is kind of perfect for a podcast.
Sure, I think that that's fun. I think it's pretty brilliant that Bill's got this super serious side on his HBO show, and then there's the other side
Yeah,
that wants to have a laugh and be amused and or irritated, which he's really good at being irritated.
totally. And then going on Howard, what's that been like for you? Are you nervous before these appearances, or you seem very much at ease, but are you in your head about it to where you're thinking about the audience and you're thinking about the number of people watching?
No, not at all. No, if I could give any insight, when you're with a highly skilled interviewer, you learn to just let them lead you where they want to go. Most interviewers are not that skilled, and so you learn in your media years to kind of push it where you want it to go.
Yes.
Great interviewers have a way of leading you, and you just let them lead you.
Yeah.
You have to trust that they're not going to try to pull a gotcha. So with somebody like Howard, I trust Howard, and I'll tell things to Howard I wouldn't say to anybody.
Why? To me, that thinks, okay, he knows how many people are listening and he knows
No,
this is going to get a lot of airplay.
no. I know he's not going to ask me the fucked up follow-up question.
Oh, what do you mean?
He's not going to ask me the clickbait question that would follow the revelation.
Huh.
It's just call it a certain type of trust.
Yeah.
I do remember when I was on Joe's show last time,
Yeah.
7 years ago, I told him a story about finding a sawed-off shotgun under my father's bed, which my father heard and had a funny response to. But that's not a story I would ever told. But I also felt I could tell it's Joe.
Yeah. And he
But there's
laughed.
no calculus in my mind, like, oh, this will be good.
Yeah.
Let me put it this way: if I really wanted attention, just imagine the things that I know that I have never said.
Right. Which you're saving for the book.
I'm talking about things I know about famous people that I've never said.
Yeah. That's what I want to know.
Well,
I
you
want
got
to
to
know
ask.
all that shit. So are you actually writing a book, or is that something you're actively working on?
In fact, just before I came on with you, I was working on my book. I was fixing a whole batch of really poor writing. But yeah, I've been working on my book. And my hope is to finish this year a book basically between the ages of 0 and 19.
Wow.
Before I would take some time off and then start, 19 onto whatever.
How are you remembering things, and do you trust your memory?
I have an insane memory. I do. I don't know if that's inborn, but I just do. I think part of it was wanting to remember all of these things that had been done to me in some sort of need to catalog. I don't know, like the man in the iron mask or something. I felt like I needed to write it all down.
Yeah.
So I did in my brain, and I've kept it. Even my wife recently said, it'll be good if you finish this so you can finally let these things go.
Do you think that'll happen?
I don't know. Because I think it's the act of putting something out in public that creates the alchemy for that. As long as it's private, it sort of remains kind of a secret. And having done it before publicly, like we were talking about with the album Siamese Dream, I do know that there's something that happens.
Yeah.
It puts an electrical charge in the air. And if it's true, it puts a really interesting electrical charge in the air. Because again, it's authentic.
Yeah.
I know, well, I don't know, but I assume or I feel that when people do read my book or books, they're going to have a hard time believing a lot of what they'll read. But I know that this stuff happened. So that's all I know. But there are times when I'm writing it and I'll read it back. I'm like, wow, it's hard to believe that this stuff actually happened.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I'll read my wife passages and I'll kind of get her reaction. And I'm like, it's crazy that this actually happened. She's like, I know you've had a crazy life, but there it is,
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to talk about as far as the show, about your process?
I really appreciate the depth of this discussion. It's a lot of fun. And yeah, I hope people enjoy the show if they see it. It's a unique entity, and I think it very much like my music. It'll win if it's unique, and it'll lose because it's too unique or something,
Oh,
and
yeah.
I'm okay with that because I wouldn't want to do it any other way. I think is what I'm after.
Yeah, it's fun. Seems like you're having a lot of fun, and seems like you're comfortable. I like your cue cards.
I'd like to ditch the cue cards if possible, but also I don't want to take my eyes off the guests. There's rude about looking away. So I don't know. I haven't figured out how to sort that out.
It's a lot. It's like, you're balancing a lot because you're trying to, like you said, expert interviewers can lead the guest in a way that they feel held and comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. And I go back to my own experiences where I would walk out and think, well, that was intense, but I enjoyed it. Kind of like this interview. It's like, it's all good. I don't mind walking up to certain lines if I feel like the intention is to get to something fresh.
Yeah.
The other experience of being held up as clickbait is a weird thing. And I'll give you one little inside hint on that. I've learned to stop saying people's names.
Yeah.
I just don't say people's names because if I say their name, it's going to get clickbaited.
Totally.
Because they need the name for the clickbait. So I just don't say the name anymore.
Yeah.
They've just made me a better, I don't want to say liar, but they've just made me a better evader. I've just become more evasive.
Yeah. No, I get that. But it's smart. I would do the same thing. I wouldn't tell anyone anything. I would be private.
I kind of like the public running into the wall part of it. It doesn't, that part doesn't bother me. It's when it gets interpreted into something that it isn't.
Right. Would you ever have anybody on the show and just like maybe somebody who you had beef with in the past or maybe still have some sort of issue with? Would you ever have them on and just like argue with them?
It would depend on the subject. For example, it would be really interesting to have a discussion with Tom Morello about politics. But only if we lived in a society that would welcome the discussion and not penalize either one of us for having the discussion.
Yes.
Well, we don't live in that society. So Tom and I can only have that discussion in private. And I think for somebody who would roll their eyes and say, why do I want to listen to musicians talk about politics? I think that's a fair point. But musicians understand what it's like to stand behind the wizard's curtain. Yeah. Musicians have access to a lot of information that most people would not know that musicians have access to. Tom even talks in his interview about how he worked for a sitting U.S. senator.
Yeah.
I mean, that's an uncommon experience.
Yeah, that was really interesting.
I know some really highly placed people in the political sphere, and I know a lot of stuff that I wouldn't talk about because it's private information, but it certainly gives me a perspective on maybe the political world that most people wouldn't have. But would I ever discuss that in public? No fucking way.
Yeah.
Because we don't live in a society that can maturely sit by and listen to two people talk about political perspectives in an open way that you go, okay, I hear you. Okay, that's good. Good. I learned something. No, it's like, oh, you're good, you're bad.
Yeah.
And again, back to the Joe Rogan thing. It's like, I mean, when I see my own fans writing words like misinformation, I mean, that's straight out of the CIA, buddy. You know what I mean? It's like, I do buzzwords for a living, rat in a cage. You know what I mean? It's like, you can't play meme word games with somebody like me. That's what I do for a living. This idea that you're going to use words against me. It's like the vague word of misinformation. It's like, what does that mean? It's a perfect word because nobody knows what it means, but everybody knows what it means.
Yeah.
So I would love it. So I would have to be,
I would love it too.
In the spirit of your question, it would have to be something that has of no consequence. Like arguing over what's the better Judas Priest album or something.
That'd be fun.
Yeah, sure. Is that a business model? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Billy, for coming on. I love talking to you.
Thank you. God bless.
And I can't wait for more of your episodes. Can't wait to see where you go as an interviewer.
Thank you so much. God bless you. Thank you.
Thanks for checking out Broken Record on YouTube. If you want to listen to us on the go, be sure to subscribe to Broken Record wherever you listen to podcasts.